Hello, and welcome to the BlockSolid podcast, where we talk about the evolution of the property market, the newest tech that enhances and revolutionizes the world of real estate and blockchain as we know it, and how we, the owners, the buyers, the renters, the investors, the entrepreneurs can benefit from it all. I'm Yael Tamar, CEO and co-founder of SolidBlock, a pioneer startup in real estate tokenization, and I'd like to welcome Lorenzo Thione. Hi, Lorenzo. How are you doing?
Hi, Yael. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's so exciting with SolidBlock being a portfolio company at Gaingels, where you're the managing director. Now, I'd love for you to give us a few words about your amazing angel organization.
Sure. So I've been spending most of my career sort of at the intersection of advocacy and representation for underrepresented groups and minorities and venture in a number of different ways, sort of entrepreneurship in a number of different ways. I've started companies, I've invested in many companies, and back in 2008, started a nonprofit called Start Out that helps and supports LGBTQ founders. And originally, Gaingels was born as a small angel group of LGBTQIA identifying angels who were investing in LGBTQ founders, sort of as a way to address some of the inequities in capital allocation. Over the years, though, we really took stock of the fact that what we wanted to do and what we were born to do was to try and help the venture ecosystem become a better sort of capital environment, one that was more representative, more diverse, more equitable, and even more accessible to a lot of different groups and people, and participation in the venture economy, in the innovation economy for all minorities is an intrinsic part of our mission. And so we changed our model and morphed into what we are today, which is a very large, very active group of investors, call it a venture syndicate, that invests in all types of companies, in all sectors, all stages, with all kinds of founders, but with the mission of partnering with each company we invest in to help them build a truly inclusive and diverse organization at all levels of leadership, of decision-making, and of value creation. That means helping them by supporting diverse founders, by helping bring diverse leaders into the company, by helping with diversity and talent recruitment, and even with the development of a diverse and inclusive board of directors and governance and cap table. We represent a lot of diverse capital that through us finds access to some of the most exciting venture opportunities, and therefore brings this capital from underrepresented communities that traditionally never had the access to invest in some of these companies, diversifying the capital structure and bringing more of that wealth creation and value creation to communities that never had the access before.
That is so exciting. And yeah, we are working together with you guys to look at different possibilities with respect to board advisors and actually board members as well, and employees that are more diverse than what you would usually find on the startup scene. Right? The startup scene is notoriously lacking in diversity. So for me specifically, as a woman, as a member of the LGBT plus community, and as somebody who's an immigrant or several times over, I've seen firsthand kind of the opportunities that are opening up through organizations like yours. And there are a few focused organizations that we had on this podcast before. I had Phil Harper with the Black Wall Street, who's working on promoting blockchain crypto specifically among the African American community. And we've had a few people on the podcast that are focused on kind of these specific groups. And it's exciting to hear that the industry is improving. Do you see that the industry is improving? Do you have some concrete data within your general, space? Because it seems like you guys are non-industry specific. And I wonder if you have noticed an increase in diversity, a further increase in diversity within any specific sectors.
Well, yes and no. We are not really kind of with a focus or in the business of trying to accumulate broad set of data across industries, but we are tracking our own progress, so to speak, and our own performance in terms of investing in companies with diverse teams, helping with recruitment and board recruitment. And what we've seen is obviously reflected in the growth and the success of our model, more companies have told us that this matters to us, and this matters to them. And this has been sort of an increasing tick over time. And we've seen a lot more openness to the model and the inclusion of an investor like Gaingels and its supports from venture capital firms that we partner with to invest in the deals that they will select, diligence, and lead. And in the past, those same firms may have acted more as gatekeepers, and now they are welcoming an investor like Gaingels to help support their portfolio companies, but also because there is an increase in the demands or the objectives from an ESG point of view that LPs in the VC funds are actually putting upon the managers. And in a sense, Gaingels acts as a way to help those funds satisfy some of those criteria, some of those objectives. And in turn, we sort of pursue our mission, right? We're seeing more participation in the venture economy by minorities. We're seeing more funding going to diverse teams. We're seeing more companies that succeed be the ones that prioritize and value diversity and inclusion at all levels of leadership. And that hopefully will translate not just in a sea change for the venture economy, but also in reflected into the public market, which ultimately is the sort of lake in which all of these, inlets, or in which these rivers from the venture stream actually end up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we have a lot to say about the advantages of diversity within corporations and within startups specifically. Can you speak of any specific benefits you've seen, or maybe your portfolio companies have seen from the increase of diversity? Does it help find more funding? Does it help advance faster, or does it help teams to perform better, get different perspective? Have you seen anything that you can speak about?
Well, so there is a lot of data that is academically and sort of rigorously obtained around the public market that speaks to the outperformance of companies that value and represent more diversity into their leadership structures, and especially on their board of directors, into companies that actually outperform their competition when their competition is less so. It may be hard to drive causal relationships here. It may be that companies that don't value diversity in the same way are, stuck to older models of doing business, which leads them to being less competitive, less innovative, and so on. But that speaks to an important change or tidal change in the mindset that sort of reminds companies that maybe if you optimize for diversity, you're much more likely to bring in also sort of a fresh mindset upon many aspects, which leads you to be more nimble, more agile, more competitive, and so on. So not driving any causal effect, there's definitely a correlation between the two. And there's a lot of data in the public market. There is not a lot of data in the private market, hopefully with sort of the passage of time and the impact and input of organizations like Gaingels, there will be. But there are also not a lot of reasons to believe that things should be drastically different, especially when we start looking at companies that for which a reasonably large leadership and governance structure makes sense. And so we're talking about companies Series C and beyond as they prepare to kind of go public. There isn't really a lot of reasons why they should behave any different than public company. Maybe things are different in the earliest stages, but what we are seeing, and that's from a competition point of view, what we're seeing is that one aspect that makes companies that do value inclusivity and diversity at all levels and do something about it, like partnering with an organization like Gaingels, and then take steps like the ones that are included in our Gaingels letter and pledge that we ask every company to acknowledge as part of our investment, it does make them more competitive on the talent market, because there is an increasingly high number of engineers and product managers and sort of workers in the startup economy for whom this is important. And I'm not just referring to minorities that feel like they're affected directly. There is sort of a broader sense that this is something that matters from sort of a point of view of this is the right thing to do, ethical, moral, and so on. But it translates to potentially not just the right thing to do in an abstract sense for the business, also the right thing for the business, and ultimately the necessary thing if you are looking at changes that are, existing in organizations like stock exchanges and so on, that now start to require disclosure rules and certain amount of diversity on board of directors. And so it becomes also good corporate hygiene to make sure that you are properly set up to, go public and continue to mature.
Wow.
And Gaingels partners with organizations to help them do that. We literally recruit board members from underrepresented backgrounds on behalf of our portfolio companies and help sort of facilitate those connections and interviewing and vetting. And ultimately, we have a really high track record of helping place independent directors on our portfolio boards. And we don't do this as a business or as a paid service. It's literally a way in which we turn around and leverage the value that we unlock by investing in great companies and invest it into helping make the ecosystem better.
That's amazing. And you mentioned tax credits. I didn't even realize that a part of the ESG tax credits is diversity. So I wonder how many companies invest. That's not correct. That's not what you said.
I'm not sure I mentioned any tax credits. I did say that there are certain stock exchanges.
Yeah, no, before.
But
ESG and
there might be. It's very possible, and probably not in the US.
You didn't say tax. You just said ESG. So it's a part of ESG.
Yeah. No, okay. There are definitely LPs in the venture funds. Yeah. Often these LPs are large institutions, pension fund, university endowments, are their organization that are with increasing frequency, asking for certain clauses, requirements, guarantees, or rules that relate to their ESG objectives to the fund managers that they invest their capital in. And so, I don't know exactly what those might be, and they vary from LP to LP. So, but there is definitely a sense that one of them is making sure that access to the deals that investors can command is opened up to more diversity by more diverse communities of investors. There is an important initiative that actually Gaingels is one of the founding signatories for, and a number of other VC firms have taken on, which is called a diversity term sheet rider or mandate. And it's basically voluntary language that companies and investors can adopt to include in their term sheets when they're basically negotiating for an investment, to basically make sure that at least a part, and that part could be a carve out in percentage of equity or in dollars, is made available for that round and for every subsequent round. And that's really important because so much of the de-risking happens once you've actually invested in a company that does well and is coming back and has the track record and the metrics and the performance to actually command more capital and to grow, to make sure that some of them is made available to diversity investors. That could be female investors, people of color, POC, BIPOC, it could be LGBTQIA, but there are many organizations. Some of them are very specific to certain communities, and some, like Gaingels, are more of a broad umbrella under the concept that bringing diverse capital onto the capital structure is a value for everybody.
That's incredible. I think that we need like a guide to different benefits, and I'm sure that there is one, and maybe you guys have one, and we'd love to put a link to it in the notes so that LPs that are listening consider to put more money into funds like yours and into funds that are valuing and promoting diversity.
We are always, of course, encouraging individual investors, especially from underrepresented backgrounds that have never considered maybe this asset class, maybe they invest regularly in real estate or other assets, but they haven't done much in venture because maybe they don't have the access to the top sort of layers of the deal flow. We encourage all of those folks to learn more about Gaingels at gaingels.com and consider becoming members. But the most important thing is we're not really a fund. So we're not raising for a fund or anything like that. It's just a group of investors to whom we accord the access to certain deals and certain opportunities. And then each individual investor is free to do as they choose if and when they want to invest. But bringing more individuals from underrepresented communities increases our impact, increases our ability to make a dent in the sort of status quo, but also increases our ability to satisfy those very ESG requirements for other funds that are leading the rounds that we participate in. And as to a guide of benefit, while we don't have like a broad kind of set of benefits or initiatives for companies or investors in an abstract sense, there are two things that are available there is one thing that is available on our website, and then another one that we send to every portfolio company that we invest in. The one that is available on our website is, in fact, the Gaingels letter or the Gaingels pledge. And that is a list of different pillars that we value and that we encourage companies to consider adopting, discussing in their board of directors meeting, and making part of their culture. Everything from supporting diversity in their leadership structure and in their recruiting, adopting the parity pledge, which is like the Rooney Rule, but for BIPOC and women when hiring, and especially when hiring leaders, really looking at the diversity and the composition of their board of directors and making sure that they're growing that organically, adding diverse board members, looking at the diversity of their capital structure, adopting, for example, a diversity term sheet writer initiative, which I mentioned a moment ago, and even considering the importance that corporations can have in the context of, broadly speaking, philanthropic causes. Each company, each culture of that company, each group of people will have natural causes and beliefs and things that they gravitate towards. And we believe it's really important for companies to practice the notion that if they do well, a part of that can be brought back into the communities to serve the needs of those who may have some, according to the principles, guidelines, and values of that individual company. We are signatories on the 1% pledge, which basically commits 1% of our future equity and profits to a certain set of philanthropic causes. For us is basically education and mentorship in the venture economy for underrepresented minorities. We basically have a scholarship fund that helps support in-need youth from minority backgrounds, including LGBTQIA, to finish their studies. We support them with any expenses that they have while they're in school. And then they go on to get internships and interviews at our portfolio companies and hopefully jobs beyond that, which is a direct path to bring more diversity and representation within and participation within the venture economy. And that's our cause, but we encourage every company that we invest in to look at what might be something that they and their employees and their stakeholders care about and do the same thing and sign the 1% pledge.
Absolutely. I love it. So one thing that I would love to talk about is our industry, blockchain and crypto. And we believe that our industry came here to level the playing field for everybody, especially minorities. And we've seen a lot of statistics about the adoption of crypto and adoption of blockchain apps and technologies by minorities. So, for example, adoption of cryptocurrencies among minorities like Black Americans, Hispanic Americans is much, much higher than white Americans, for example. So it's 23% for Black Americans, 17% for Hispanic Americans, and just 11% for white Americans, according to Coinbase. On top of that, there have been several articles about the LGBTQ plus community adopting cryptocurrencies at a much higher rate as well. Of course, women are bringing a lot of the projects in crypto. I specifically love the NFT market because it seems like, at least in the beginning, it was one of the main things that differentiated or that gave opportunities to artists of color. And I think more and more technologies are going to be coming out with crypto trends that are going to continue, right? Let people of color and other minorities to jump ahead, right? And level the playing field. Have you seen similar things specifically in blockchain or NFTs? And do you feel maybe this industry is this force of nature leveling the playing field? And maybe there are other industries where you can see that as well?
Well, I'm no expert and I don't sort of claim to have sort of deep insights or knowledge. I think that everything you just said kind of makes sense from a simple point of view, which is anytime there is a technology that sort of disrupts the status quo, and that is directly aimed at creating an access that is unfettered and universal to a certain opportunity, investment, asset class, or what have you, the ones that are going to benefit from that the most are the ones that in the status quo had the fewest opportunities to access assets and opportunities for wealth and so on. And so, when you look at as things systemically have been established for decades, there is no question that you're going to find that minorities have felt left out of opportunities, be it in the stock market or in other sectors, because primarily where access were flowing, information was flowing, who controlled the cards and which funds and private equity firms and so on we're in control of IPO shares or whatnot, right? And so when you open up any kind of sort of new way to that seems and that intrinsically puts no barrier to in front of folks, then you're going to have more of a enthusiasm and uptake from those that have pent up pressure. They have assets and needs and desire to grow those assets that are not met or not as much in the current state of things. So, I don't know the stats, and, I think that you're probably much more aware of what those stats are. But generally speaking, it just simply makes sense. And I think that it's a trend that will continue. And if the new world order that this ushers in, for whatever reason, ends up still favoring some but not all, maybe across some other dimensions, I can, for example, imagine those dimensions to be geopolitical. There are certain countries that will embrace or will not embrace certain type of crypto assets or whatnot. And if that explodes, if the opportunity is realized and a lot of wealth is realized, is the people that feel left out from those countries that don't have that access that will be benefiting the most from the next technical revolution that aims at, hopefully, undoing that kind of imbalance along geopolitical lines. So it's just a general concept that makes a lot of sense. And I think that we should all be embracing opportunities for equalizing and democratizing access to wealth and access to growth and opportunity.
Absolutely. And we've seen the rise of crypto also in war areas. And obviously, because it's very difficult to transfer fiat or any other type of financial service, and crypto is just there to help people cope and help send aid and payments to different suppliers and so on. So me as a Ukrainian by birth, I feel definitely grateful for being able to donate in crypto and so on. I'm a little bit biased, I guess, because I see the good of the crypto. While of course there are some things like with any new technology that contribute to some level of, fraud and a little bit of misery. But I think it's going to the benefits will greatly outweigh the disadvantages.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And speaking of NFTs in art, you have quite the art background yourself with helping write a musical on Broadway in 2015. I'd love for you to give us a quick overview of how you combine that part of your life with investing.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned at the very beginning, my life has been sort of really kind of marked by the desire to bring more representation to the world. I really think visibility and representation is really one of the most powerful forces for people to kind of take up, sort of pick up the ideas they have and go out and seek change and create that change. It's only when you actually see yourself reflected into a future you hope for or dream through the eyes of someone that looks like you or that maybe comes from the same country or that has those same experience that it's possible. And, what happened was not really, I don't have a background, so to speak, in the arts, but I met the actor George Takei one day back in 2008. George was, of course, really famous for his role in Star Trek, being Sulu in the original Star Trek series. But what people at the time certainly didn't know, hopefully, or I'm hoping as much as they do now, also thanks to the work that we've done, was that when he was a child, he and his family were imprisoned in camps in the United States for no crime other than the fact that they had descended from the same people and population that had just declared war to the United States and attacked Pearl Harbor, right? We imprisoned and interned and deprived of liberty and assets and homes and jobs, 120,000 people, many of which were born in this country, were actual citizens of the United States. And everybody else was also legal residents, immigrants into the United States for no crimes, just because we were afraid, we were hysterical about the war, and we lacked real leadership that sort of manipulated instead at that time those fears for various types of political and sometimes financial gain. And that was a huge blunder on our own held values and our Constitution. And it took decades to even, in principle, rectify it and apologize and issue reparations and all of that. And when I met George and learned about history and how much it affected his own family and how, despite of that, his outlook on life and on the country and on its future was so optimistic. I felt like that was a story that people needed to hear and relate to and learn from, and hopefully kind of impart some lessons that would make it hard for things to be repeated, even though this was 2008. And I remembered very well, as a recent immigrant at the time, the attacks on September 11th and the rhetoric that very similarly was being used against Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, being immigrant or not, or citizen. And that while we narrowly escaped, we weren't very far from doing things like rounding up people and depriving them of liberty and homes and assets. And then we decided to write a show about it. And it was a musical that starred George Takei, opened in San Diego and then on Broadway with Lea Salonga. It's now coming back to London next year with George in it, which is super exciting. What we never knew and never expected is that by the time we opened on Broadway in 2015, 2016, the national rhetoric around immigrants would be worse than when we had started. And that there were literally people in cages at the border were being often held for no crime, and certainly for, due to the manipulation of fear and, and anger and sort of socioeconomic maladjustment that politicians were, largely kind of riling up. So that started my dedication also to tell stories of visibility and representation in the arts as well. I wrote and produced that show, co-wrote and produced that show, and then I'm working on a new show that features a character with, a neurodivergent character with autism on this autism spectrum that is represented by an incredible actress who is identifies on the spectrum as well. And again, it's about empathy and visibility for people whose stories maybe we expect not to be able to relate to, but that ultimately have the hallmarks of every human experience. And then have produced a number of other shows, from Hadestown to Slave Play to The Inheritance to many others, often because I felt the connection to the story, to the sort of necessity of creating empathy, was too strong for me to not be involved.
Absolutely. What a fascinating story. I can't wait for it to come to London, because it's easy for me to fly to London from Tel Aviv to attend. So I think there is one more fascinating blockchain concept that has become very, very popular last year, and it's called DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And I think that it might even be the winner among everything so far, cryptocurrencies or crypto assets or NFTs. DAOs encourage participation of community in the governance process of a corporation or a government. And with board of directors, ultimately the company or the investors vote on their candidacy. Same for company leadership. But if you have a DAO of company clients, especially if they are, significant clients that buy a lot of product, or that buy or invest in a company as a part of some sort of a public or semi-public offering, then, these people should have a say in the governance. And I love it that the US regulators and some US states really embrace the structure. So we have DAO as a legal structure in Wyoming. And I think even funds now could, well, I know you guys are not a fund, more you syndicate investments, and you invite your members of your community to participate in investment rounds. But in general, there is a way to create a DAO as for every single SPV, basically, that goes and invests in a company, to give some sort of a way for community members to vote on certain issues that could maybe facilitate diversity. And I've seen quite a few startups that are working in that space on promoting diversity and voices and inclusion. Do you see DAO in Gaingels' future, perhaps?
Who knows? Maybe. I can tell you that interestingly enough, the idea is good. People in theory want a say and want more representation and want an ability to vote on things and do things. In reality, what we see is that, generally speaking, people are very happy with representative government, right? And so the idea is, hey, I don't have the right instrument or the right knowledge or the right information to make decisions on every small aspect of this. I am much rather that someone who is better equipped with that experience and that knowledge make decisions on my behalf. So we actually were born without talking about DAOs, but we were born using a structure for which each SPV was managed and administered by its own members. And you don't need a DAO when you have 20 people that need to vote on something, but you do need to go and ask them every time there is something to vote, hey, please vote on this aspect and please make a decision. And what we effectively heard is, can you please make decisions on our behalf? We don't know. We don't want to deal with this. We don't. And so over time, we actually morphed all of those SPVs, and the current model is more of a traditional fund managed model where we basically make decision as fund advisors on behalf of the SPVs where one is necessary. And yes, maybe, but I think that the real value of DAOs this is my own opinion, are to allocate capital and resources in a way that is democratically held by a certain group of stakeholders and people in places where there are no strong financial economic incentives to do so. So things like the attempt at Constitution DAO was a good example of that, right?
Right.
No one's going to be like, I want to create a business to buy the Constitution and I will be the manager of that business or the CEO. Please give me money so that I can do that. But a group of people may collectively decide that it's in their interest philosophically or morally to do so. And this is true for things that, for example, can have huge environmental impact, but have no good business economics attached to it. And that it's hard to build a traditional, business around. And I think that could be a really interesting model for DAOs to organize around.
Absolutely. And you just gave me a few ideas as well, because in general, yes, decisions that have to do with expertise are generally outsourced, but then to somebody who has that expertise, right? And then there's always a way to reassign your vote to the management in a way that's very, very transparent. But in the situations where certain underrepresented groups want to bring a certain agenda to an investment fund or to the government or to a foundation, like what to tackle, for example, and also maybe on the other hand, to veto certain initiatives, right, that they know are not conducive to promoting of their values. I think this could be definitely a tool for foundations and nonprofits and governments of the future, right? Digital government. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really, really exciting. And you are super knowledgeable about blockchain and crypto. And I love this conversation. I'd love to learn what's next about Gaingels, what's next for Gaingels, where we can find more information, how can one join and invest, or just attend events, because I've been to a few of your events and it was so fabulous. I can't even describe the people that I met, the high quality of the community in terms of professionalism, interest. It's incredible. So tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. People can just go to Gaingels.com and learn everything about it, how we work with companies, how we work with individuals, what our community events look like, what our investments opportunities may look like. And I invite anybody who has an interest and might be keen on learning more to just go to Gaingels.com and do so. On the question of what's next for Gaingels, I hope there is more growth within BIPOC communities, women investors, LGBTQIA investors. And what I mean is that we were born out of it and that was great. And then we started doing really well. And the opportunities and the investment opportunities were pretty fantastic, and deals and companies that were inviting us in and VCs that invite us in. And all of a sudden, there is all of this traditional money that is seeing this as another really great opportunity to drive capital and drive capital return. Now, there isn't anything bad about that. And honestly, the capital that they are driving helps us have an impact on the ecosystem in all sorts of other ways, right? And so it's important for us to be able to invest in more companies with larger checks and sort of have the wherewithal to influence the conversation in all the ways that we've described. But at the same time, we don't want that capital to eclipse diverse capital. And so really everyone out there who thinks, maybe venture investing might be interesting and a good way to diversify and want to learn more, I really encourage them to do so and learn about Gaingels, because it might be that this is a good opportunity for them. And if it is, and they end up deciding that they want to join, become investors and invest in opportunities that may be open at whatever time, they would know that their contributions is also helping kind of bring more diverse capital into the ecosystem. And that's a really important objective for us. So growing, yes, but growing by adding a lot of diverse members and investors is our first priority.
Absolutely. And you brought a very important point. When minorities invest and underrepresented groups or members of underrepresented groups invest, they talk about it in their own group and subjecting their friends and family from the same background possibly to these opportunities as well. Statistically, you're much more likely to participate in a certain investment if you hear about it from a friend or a family member, and you might not even consider to invest in a startup until you meet somebody. And I can see it firsthand, when you meet on the playground with other moms next to the kindergarten, there's not a lot of talk about this startup or that startup, this investment, I invested in this crypto and that crypto. And me personally, I had to find a group of geeks, which are predominantly male, and, in order to have that conversation. And thankfully, with social media and Telegram, Discord now, anybody can go under any profile, with any picture and just participate and get information. But, most people still communicate in living rooms. And so I think it's super, super important for us to not only to participate and invest, but also talk about it in our communities.
For sure. Yeah.
So as I said, Gaingels also invested in Solid Block, for which we are truly grateful. And of course, we're super excited to have a group like Gaingels on our cap table. And we have a pretty diverse investor group, actually. From the very beginning, I had a goal to have female investors. And we have a few, thankfully. It wasn't easy, but we have a few. And then we learned about Gaingels and we got super, super excited. We also have people of color. It's great. So are there other blockchain or real estate tokenization startups in your portfolio? And what is your sense about just generally the fit of our industry within Gaingels?
So, our portfolio is so big. It's 1,500 companies, and each one of us can only sort of keep track and sort of be aware of a number of them. I know for a fact that there are many other crypto and Web3 companies, and at least a handful of companies in the sort of general space of asset, create crypto assets out of real world assets in various ways. It could be sneakers or real estate or what have you. I do think that, from the point of view of just broadly speaking, there has been an explosion the last couple of years, the creation of the very concept and then a really big growth. And we're going to continue to see attention to these concepts because they add real utility and real value, and they eliminate barriers that are bureaucratic or jurisdictional or of any other kind to the idea of trading and acquiring assets. On the other hand, I do think that there is also a number of members of our network who are particular experts and interested in the space. And so they would have been the ones driving the investments into each one or some of the companies that we've invested. The thing to keep in mind is that there's more than 3,200 investors in our group, and the typical number of investors that participate into one opportunity is less than 50. And so you basically end up with a lot of distribution of people being interested in different things. And, someone may never invest in a crypto related company because of their own lack of expertise or lack of belief or whatever it is. But for every person that doesn't, maybe there is another one or maybe two that actually do. And so there is definitely clearly a fit for crypto space companies into our portfolio, and I expect that there will continue to be.
I love that. Well, thank you for joining me on the BlockSolid podcast today, Lorenzo. It was great having you with us.
It was great being here. So thank you so much, Yael.
Absolutely. So you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or by visiting our website, solidblock.co/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe and spread the word. Thank you for listening.